A warm good afternoon to everyone who is viewing the last day of the pre-bird festival of Goa webinar series. We have had a series of very enlightening and useful talks over the past 3 days by five speakers. And today, being the fourth and the final day, we have two other speakers who will be concluding the webinar series. So, let me quickly introduce to you today's two speakers. Our first speaker of the day is Ms. Golda De Costa, who is a postgraduate in zoology and currently a faculty at the Department of Zoology in the Government College of Arts, Science and Commerce, Sankelim. She is also an active bird watcher and a member of the Goa Bird Conservation Network. She will be today speaking about wetland birds of Goa and trying to focus on habitats of importance, that is wetlands in the state of Goa. The second speaker of the day is Mr. Jalmesh Karapurkar, who is also an alumni of the Government College Sankelim, a postgraduate in zoology. He is the current president of the Aranya Environment Research Organization, an environment education NGO based in Sankelim in Goa, and is actively involved in designing and executing several education and outreach activities in the state. Jalmesh has spent considerable time working at the Center for Ecological Sciences at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, where he studied birds from the high altitude Trans Himalayas of Lahaul Spiti district in Himachal Pradesh and was trying to understand their community dynamics and response to short growing season in that landscape. In Goa, he has been actively trying to understand vocalizations of the Sri Lanka frogmouth with a manuscript on a new call description submitted for publication, and has spent a lot of time, peering into the darkness, trying to study the birds of Goa's darkness, as he rightly puts it. And today, he will share with us experiences of his work with some of the most cryptic and elusive birds of Goa's night. So, with that brief introduction about both the speakers, I bring on the stream Ms. Golda, who will begin with her talk on wetland birds of Goa. Golda, if you could share your presentation and you could begin today's first talk.
Yeah, thank you, Pranay. Are we good to go? Hello, Pranay.
Yes, Golda, you are good to go. Please go
Yeah,
ahead. Thank you.
thank you. So the reason actually why I chose this topic of wetland birds of Goa is because tomorrow we are celebrating the World Wetlands Day, that is 2nd February, right? So actually, if I ask you which is your favorite place in nature to visit or to hang around, okay, most of you will probably say it could be a beach or it could be a stream or it could be a birders would probably say it's a forest area. But we usually do not find people saying that they like visiting the wetlands, isn't it? Okay. But wetlands, if you go to see, they are one of the most diverse and very distinct ecosystems. Okay, it does not, the wetlands do not fall into a terrestrial proper or a water body proper, but it is somewhere in between. So that is what makes it very unique, right? So, according to the Ramsar Convention, wetlands are defined as areas of marsh, fen, peatland, or a water body, which could be fresh water, brackish water, or salt water. Or it could be even wet grasslands, tidal flats, paddy fields, or salt pans, which are usually natural or they could be artificially created. And usually wetlands are very close to human beings, right? The staple food, our staple food, that is rice, it comes from the paddy fields, right? So these wetlands, they could be temporary or they could be permanent water bodies with water that is either static or it is flowing. And not just this freshwater bodies, but it also includes the areas of marine waters, the depth of which at low tide does not exceed 6 meters, right? And wetlands are very important in terms of, for example, like the mangroves, okay, the marshy areas, which are called the nurseries of the oceans, wherein the fingerlings of the fishes they thrive over there for food and shelter. And not just the fishes, but even there are diverse group of animals like the mollusks and the turtles. Okay, and in the other wetlands, of course, we find the other reptiles or crocodiles, and of course the birds. Okay, the focus of which is today birds. So why exactly birds visit wetlands? We find many of the birds switching from one wetland to the other. Okay, basically because the wetlands are very productive. They hold population of different kinds of plants, different vegetation, and even different animals. So it's a very good place for birds to visit. Maybe it could be for feeding purpose or it could be for resting purpose. Okay, and we see that during this time of the year, okay, the winters, we see many of the migratory birds that are visiting the wetlands. Okay, so between the migration, birds require some resting places to rejuvenate and refuel themselves. So these form very important and very comfortable habitats for the birds which are migrating in and out of the place. Okay, and also because probably because the predation level in these areas is comparatively low. I won't say it is nil, but it is comparatively low than the other places. Okay. So coming to Goa, we see that there are many small to large wetlands in our state. Some of the wetlands I have noted down on my right. Okay, we see that there are some wetlands in the South Goa, and also there are good number of wetlands in the northern part of Goa. Now, among all these small to large wetlands which we find in our own state, at least 21 of them are of greater importance, okay, or they are frequently visited by the birds, okay, the wetland birds or the water birds. And of all these wetlands, we have two wetlands, that is Karambolim Lake and the Navelim wetland in Sankelim, which are notified as IBAs or the important bird and biodiversity areas. Okay, so these are the areas which will have not just water birds but the other birds also. Okay, IBA usually has its criteria to notify a particular area as important bird area. Okay, so we just have two of it, and in future probably if um, GBCN and of course the other bird watchers are making great efforts in compilation of data of different birds that are visiting these wetlands. So probably in future we will have more wetlands, okay, which can be notified as IBAs. So here is a compile. This I've taken from the compilation by Prannoy. Okay, you can see that in the different wetlands which are there in the Goa, for any particular wetland to be or any other area to be notified as IBA, it needs to have certain number of threatened species which are categorized by IUCN, right? And also some range restricted species. So if we have enough number of such species that are visiting our wetland areas, then it can be notified as an IBA. Of course, a lot of efforts are required. And here is the map showing distribution of wetland bird species in Goa. Okay, so the first map shows the species in 2015 in both the districts of Goa, the north and the south. And in the second map, you can see the number of species. Also, of course, this species number is not only of wetland birds, but it's overall the number of birds which are found over there. So you can see that the number over time from 2015 to 2018 has increased. Number of species that are found have increased, right? So here you can see here these graphs give you the diversity of species across the wetlands of Goa. So this shows you the species diversity in 2015 and this is in 2018. And you can see that these two lakes, okay, the Karamboli Dhado part of the wetland and the Karamboli Lake proper, in both the years, okay, show quite a huge number of species diversity of wetland birds, right? And also in the south, we have mostly decent number of species that are noted in the southern part of Goa, okay, especially in, you can see that in the Raya area, okay, it's quite high. So this was the report that was compiled by Prunoy with so in 2018, the all Goa water bird count reported around 64 species of water birds and 17 species of wetland associated birds. Now, what is meant by wetland associated birds is that there are some birds which are not compulsorily wetland species or they do not require to be in that area as such, but they are indirectly dependent on the wetlands, like the kingfishers and the eagles, kites, and so on. Okay, so they are the wetland associated birds. And majority of these water birds which visit the wetlands are migratory. Okay, migratory, I mean, by migratory, I mean that they migrate from one part of the world to the other part of the world. Okay, and we have many local migrants which move in and out between the states within our country. So the wetlands, so the birds that are frequently visiting our wetlands are the rails. Then we have good number of ducks visiting our wetlands. Then geese, terns, gulls, and a very good number of waders also. Okay. So some of the migrants that you see over here are the terns and gulls, and we have this common green shank, then gargani. I'm not going into details of all the birds. I will only show a few pictures of the migratory birds. Okay. And we have the northern pintail. Pintails are called so because of this pointed feathers, tail feathers of theirs. Then we have the lesser sand plover. Also, we have northern shoveler. You know, shoveler means spatula. Okay, it's given its name because of its beak that looks like a spatula or a spoon. Okay, then we have ruddy shell duck. Ruddy shell ducks in India they are called Brahmini ducks, and in the central parts of Asia, they are considered to be sacred by Buddhists. You know, when the birds or the other animals they are considered sacred, indirectly they are given protection also. Okay, so this is one of the species that is considered sacred in the Central Asian countries by the Buddhists. And then we have Eurasian spoonbills, known for its broad spoon-like beak. Then we have Palasker, and we have local migrants like the Indian spot-billed duck, then little ring plover. Then these two ibises are the frequent visitors to our state's wetlands, the black-headed ibis and the glossy ibis. And we have the flamingos. If I'm not mistaken, I'm not sure though, but I think the first reports of flamingos could be before that also. But as far as I know, it was in 2012 in Karamboli Dado wetland. The greater flamingo was first sighted. Then, of course, in 2016, this is a picture taken by Mandar in Akasa mudflats. Okay, and of course, in 2019 also, we had spotted it in one of the wetlands in Raya. Not a very frequent visitor though. Then we have storks like the painted storks, woolly necked storks, the Asian open bill. Asian open bills are also because of this gap between their beak or the jaws. No, it's because of the kind of food they eat, that is the conge or the shellfish. Then we have coots. Okay, I this is not a very distant image, but I wanted an image in this angle. Okay, so a little information about coot is that coots and the other rails, okay, which includes our water hens and swamp hens also, they usually have a weaker flight. So a bird, when it's having a weaker flight, it is quite effortful for them to take off. So a peculiar behavior of them is that they will dabble on the water surface before they take off. Another interesting thing about them is that the males of this species, when they are fighting, when they get into a fight, they will fight using their feet. Okay, you can see their feet. So it's something little interesting about them. Then we have the cotton pygmy goose, then the pond heron. The pond heron is a very frequent visitor. Almost in every wetland, if you go to see, you will definitely find at least one pond heron. It's quite common in most of the habitats. Of course, in most of the wetlands, in certain wetlands, you will see that there are only particular kind of wetland bird species, whereas in certain wetlands you will see some other ones, and in some you will see a mixture of all. Okay, it could probably be because of the preference of food or the availability of food in particular wetlands, or it could also be because to avoid overcrowding. So what you find in one particular, the birds you find in one particular wetland, you may not see it in some other wetlands. Okay, it varies from year to year also. Then we have the purple heron and the gray heron. These are also commonly seen. Then we have the egrets, the greater egret, the little egret, and of course the intermediate egret. Okay, I think every year we see a stable every year we see a stable population of egrets. Okay, if you go around this time in any of the wetlands, you will see a huge flock of egrets, okay, splashing the wetland area as white. Okay, and one interesting thing about egrets is that, and of course some other herons also, is their breeding plumage. During the breeding season, they get this fantastic, attractive breeding plumage. Then we have the rails, which are resident birds. Okay, the gray-headed swamp hen, or it's also called the purple moorhen. It's quite a simple but decent-looking bird. And if you see flocks of these together, the wetland will look purple, or it will be painted as purple. Okay, then we have white-breasted water hen. And we have other residents like the little cormorant and the oriental darter, which is also called a snake bird because of its peculiar habit of keeping its head above the surface of water while it is moving in the water. And one interesting thing about them is that when they come out of the water, they will spread their wings out and they will remain that way, okay, to dry up their wings. It's a very peculiar feature of the birds belonging to this family of cormorants and darters. Okay, it's also called a darter because, with this long neck of it will dart. Okay, it will dart into the fish. That's why it's called a darter. And darters are usually solitary, and the cormorants often you will see them roosting together on the branches of trees above the surface of surrounding water bodies. And then we have jacanas. Jacanas are, I find it quite interesting to see jacanas. Actually, if you look at this picture over here, it seems like extra legs are coming out from the body of this bird, right? But these pictures are both of the males, okay, and the males of most of the jacana species, they show great parental care. That is, whenever they sense danger around, they will carry their cheeks under their wings. So what you see over here are the two cheeks that are carried by this male under its wings to safety. Okay. Then we have lesser whistling ducks. Lesser whistling ducks. So one thing I wanted to make a mention over here is that when I was a child, I always used to consider all the birds that remain in the water as ducks. So for me, every bird that is in the water would be a duck because they all seemed similar in shape. Okay, the only difference I could see is that they have different colors. Okay, but one thing I wanted to mention about ducks is that they show a very peculiar behavior here called appending. Okay, so when they are feeding, they will submerge part of their body inside the water while keeping their rear part above it. Okay, so this is a behavior shown by all the ducks. You know, there are ducks and there are geese and there are swans. Okay, so geese are slightly larger than the ducks, also having slightly longer neck than swans are, of course, quite big, okay, or larger, but all of them belong to the same family. But this particular behavior or this kind of behavior is only shown by the ducks. And if you see the reports again, okay, of the past 2 decades, you see that the lesser whistling ducks population is quite stable over the last 2 decades. But if you see the overall migratory duck population, okay, this of course Pranay had discussed it yesterday also. Years, if you compare it to the past few years, it is quite, I mean, of the past few years, it is quite low. Whereas in 2001 to 4, I think it was around 2002 somewhere, wherein there was huge duck population in our state, okay, which was attributed probably because the rest of the India was facing drought conditions. And this is the recent all Goa water bird count. Okay, I'm sure most of you have gone through this. Okay, we see that the majority of the population of, I mean, the glossy ibis, which is a local migrant, okay, we see it in huge numbers. Also, the lesser whistling duck, okay, which, of course, it is most of the years we have seen that the population of the lesser whistling duck is quite stable. And of course, the pintails, of course, it has a fluctuating number over the past few years. So, why do we need to know about wetland birds? Okay, is it only because they have different colors, or we just note down the different species that are seen and then just upload them on a particular site? Okay, so I don't believe it is just that. Okay, just going and observing. Of course, it's a good habit to go and just observe and admire things in nature, but there is also a purpose why we need to know about these wetland birds. Now, since wetlands are prone to destruction in the past few years, they are highly prone to destruction, maybe for construction site, purpose of construction sites or agricultural purpose, or they have also been victims of industrial wastes, okay, thus polluting them. So knowing about the wetland birds and how many birds and how many species of birds that are visiting the wetlands, okay, gives us an idea about the health of our wetlands, right? And wetlands, as I told before, that they are not just supporting birds, they are supporting also the different animals that are found around it. So it becomes when we upload the data that we collect on this particular sites like the eBird or the Citizen Science, we are actually providing data for the concerned people, okay, so that they can compile up the data and they can bring about some, or they can plan some better management strategies, because ultimately we need to conserve our wetlands. So I always believe that if we like something, we will definitely make sure that we conserve it, right? So whenever we go for bird walks which are conducted by GBCN or many of the people who are just solitary bird watchers, we see that we notice that there are quite a number of senior people, and we also find some youngsters and even children visiting or going for bird watching. So it is very important that the interest in observing the birds is sustained. Unless and until we sustain this interest, we may not be bothered about conserving them, right? Because some of us may just go observe it and be least bothered about their conservation. Whereas some of us, if we are sensitive enough, we will definitely think about their conservation and spread awareness, of course. And that is the main motto of this bird festival, that is to spread awareness about the bird conservation, right? So if we are protecting the wetlands, we are definitely protecting the birds, okay, both the wetland birds and the wetland associated birds. And since we are protecting the birds, we are of course then conserving our wetlands as well. So it goes hand in hand. So if we conserve one thing, it leads to the conservation of the other. So ultimately, that is actually the motto of this bird festival. That's it.
Thanks a lot, Golda. So we'll wait for a few minutes to see if there are any questions for you,
Yes.
and then you can take them up. Sometimes questions also come at the end of the session, like when both the talks are over as well. So if there are no questions right now, we'll move to the next talk for the day, and you can take the questions later. But if we have questions right now, you can take them. For example, there is one right now. I'll flash it on your screen. There you go.
Bar, there are Pranay will be in a better position to answer this, but I think there have been some sightings of bar-headed goose. Pranay, could you please answer this?
Yeah. So the bar-headed geese has been a very scarce vagrant to Goa. There have been there is one very old historical record from 1987, if I'm not wrong, by Heinz. And after that, there was a big lull till a flock was spotted in Zuari, uh, the Zuari Plateau, Zach Reservoir, by Joshua and a couple of others. And after that, there has been one more sighting by a visiting European bird watcher. And after that, there has been one last year, means this winter season, and several people have seen it as well. So there have been about 4 to 5 confirmed records of the bar-headed goose in Goa. The problem is that there is not enough suitable habitat for the bar-headed geese in our state. So that's probably one reason that they don't come all the way here. So that is the reason why you don't see them much. All right. So since there are no more questions as of now, we'll move to the next talk for the day. Thanks a lot, Golda, for that amazing talk on wetland birds and wetlands, and the final message on trying to conserve wetland birds. Okay, there is one more question, I guess, which has come up for you.
Yes.
Which are the easily accessible mangroves in Goa for birding?
Um, well, if you see the mangroves, we have a large patch of mangroves in the northern part of the states, okay? And we also have the area that is the Shoram Island that is usually easily accessible. But as as far as birding is concerned, that is mostly a roosting site. They do have they do take you on a boat for bird watching over there, but I feel that it is more of a roosting site, right? You want to add
Uh,
something on that?
there's another question for you. Let's get to that. Yeah. Can you please give us more information about wetland birds at Amtane Lake? Has there been any documentation from the place? How can we help documenting birds at the same place?
Mahima, actually, I have never been to that lake, but I have heard that the number of birds visiting that lake is quite less. And as far as documenting the birds is concerned, Pranay can help you with that.
Yeah. So Mahima, I am assuming you are from that area, and for a long time, Amtane Lake was actually a part of the Algoa water bird count from 2014. But then the Amtane Lake is basically a reservoir. Right, there is a dam, there is a catchment area, and then there is a dam. So the reservoir is so deep most of the times that it's not a very good habitat for a lot of wetland birds. It's just like the reservoir at Salauli or the reservoir at Keri, that is Anjuna. That's how deep it is. So it's not a very good habitat for a lot of waders and even for a lot of ducks. But it is definitely an important habitat for several other associated species. So if you are interested, please, you don't have to depend on anyone but your own self. All you have to do is go out, do bird watching, and so share that information on citizen science platforms. That's all you have to do, and then over time you can build evidence for that site. And if it is really important for conservation at a very local scale, it doesn't even have to be at a global scale. At a local scale, there are several other methods that we could discuss out of this talk, since this doesn't deal with that. So yeah, thank you so much, Mahima. All right, so we'll move to the next talk for the day. Thanks, Golda, once again,
Yes.
and
Thank
I
you.
hope you'll be at the stream so that if there are any more
Yes.
questions for you, you could answer them at the end. So let me bring on the stream next, Jalmesh, who will now speak on the nightlife of Goa. I'm sure it's going to be an interesting one. So Jalmesh, if you could share your screen, and we could begin with today's session, and also unmute yourself.
Yes, can you
You're
hear
good.
me?
Please go ahead. And your
Yeah,
volume is low, so if you could keep your mic a little bit closer, it will be great.
okay, now?
Yeah, it's better. Thank you so much. Please go ahead.
Okay, so hello everyone. As Pranesh already introduced me, okay, so I'll be talking today about night birds of Goa, as you can see on the screen. Uh, but
Dhanush, your
before,
presentation has kind of disappeared. You will have to reshare it.
okay, yeah, I'll do that. Now,
It is up now. Now you can continue. Thank you so much.
okay, so before going to night birds of Goa, before talking about birds, let's talk about Goa. Okay, so life in Goa. So for us who live in Goa, Goa is a very peaceful kind of a place. Okay, people do farming, uh, go for fishing. Then there's greenery around. We remember stuff from our childhood memories, that school picnics, teachers used to take us to temples, churches, or the tourist places. So uh, if we think about Goa, then that's what pop-ups in our head. Okay, so that is my personal point of view. And obviously, without including fish curry rice in the explanation of Goa, uh, it doesn't complete the story. Okay, so after that, uh, so let's see what other people think about Goa. Okay, uh, if you go out of Goa, and or if you are introducing yourself to someone from outside from Goa, they will ask you whether their question will be like, do you live on a beach, or you people might drink every day, or for the food. You might be also visiting the casinos every week. Okay, and we are mostly staying on the beach. That's what they think. Okay, I for personally, I have asked this question 2 3 times in Goa. So people who are traveling, internal traveling in Goa, tourists, where is the Goa beach? Okay, so for them, Goa is not a state, or it's not a it's just a beach for them. Okay, so that's what people think. And this perspective is mostly because of the tourists. They come and enjoy the beaches, enjoy the casinos. But if you go to nightlife of Goa, that is, if you think specifically about the nightlife of Goa, then this is what comes up if you put it on Google search. Okay, I am not saying this, Google is saying this. So nightlife is in Goa is basically enjoying clubs, pubs. So for people who are traveling from outside, tourists, this is the nightlife of Goa, and they come to enjoy this life in Goa. But some of the tourists, that is very less percent of tourists, uh, visit Goa to see. So I'm just putting off the cam. Visit Goa to see something like this. Okay, so if you can hear the call, the recording. Okay, so for naturalists and people who are interested in wildlife, they come to Goa to see this stuff, that is
Dhanush, your call, your recording didn't play. You mentioned about recording. I don't think we heard something. Maybe you could check that.
sure. Now?
I don't think it's still played.
No? You cannot hear the recording, right?
No, no, no. Could you just check that, please?
Wait. Now?
Yes, it's audible. Thank you.
Can you hear now?
It was audible, but your presentation closed down.
Just give me a minute. Still cannot hear the call?
It was fine. Please go ahead now.
Yes? Uh, I cannot hear you.
I said the call played fine. Please go ahead now.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So many people come to Goa, mostly visiting the Western Ghats to see such kind of beauties. Okay, so there's not lot of people who come. You might have heard Parag sir talking on the first day about tourists. Okay, so this is a part of it. Then let's come back to birds. If you think about birds which are active at night, okay, birds, night birds of Goa. So why basically birds are active at night? um, if you think about it, uh, birds are mostly compete with each other uh, for the resources that they feed on. Okay, uh, so what why these birds basically are active at night? Because they have other give me a moment, just silent the phone. Yeah, so why these birds are active at night? Okay, so birds are active at night because they share similar feeding habits with other similar birds. Okay, so what I mean by that is, if you see the barn owl, the first owl that I have shown a picture on the left, uh, it feeds on small mammals, okay, and mostly rodents. And those rodents are mostly hunted down by shikras and small raptors. So that is how they compete for food. But to reduce that competition, barn owl prefers means they adapted to nightlife, and for which they have to uh, they actually choose different time to feed on that same resources. Okay, so that is called as resource partitioning in scientific terms. So they do that to feed without competing with others. uh, but obviously, as you know, everything comes with a price. Feeding it activity during night time is means they being active at night, it's not so easy. So what are the difficulties that they face? Okay, first one is low light, because it's a night time. There is a very less light, or there is no light. Then nights are usually silent. You can hear small sounds. so it becomes difficult for them to hunt down the prey. Then if you think about daytime, compare daytime and nighttime, the weather is cold. Okay, so to adapt to that, they have to survive the night. So for that, the first adaptation they go through is, this adaptation happens mostly in owls. Okay, so first is fringed flat feathers. So these feathers help them to reduce the noise that is created while flapping the uh, wings. Okay, second one is eye adaptation. So their binocular vision, this two eyes are faced front, so that vision from both the eyes overlap. Okay, that overlap helps them to uh, differentiate between what is placed further and what is closer, as in they can understand the 3D visual. They can get the 3D vision. Okay, if the two vision from two eyes overlap, that is how the 3D movies also work. Okay, then they can see very well in night, because their eyes have their eyes are made up of rods, most of rods than cones, if you know what are rods and cones then. Okay, so they can see in low light, but they cannot see more colors. Okay, so they can see only black, white and gray. um, that is the difficulty. But obviously they don't need coloration. Their basic needs is feeding and mating. So for that they don't need coloration in the eye. So coming back to feather coloration. Okay, so they have to camouflage themselves very well, so that people or predators during daytime should not see them. So they hide themselves in the open daylight, because of the camouflage of their, means the wing coloration, their coloration and the habitat coloration matches. That is what camouflage means. And last is ear placement. So their ears are placed asymmetrically to increase the hearing accuracy. So how that works is, if the ears are symmetrically positioned, then you can hear from which direction the call is coming from, then call or any sound. Okay, but if the two ears are asymmetrical, then you can also understand at what height, as in the horizontal axis, on a horizontal axis, where the call is coming from or the sound is coming from. So that helps them during the night time. Mm, First, coming to owls, starting with the most common barn owl that is seen, uh, that you might have seen. So this barn owl feeds on small mammals, like rodents mostly. I have seen this barn owls feeding on rodents, then feeding the chicks with rodents. They, what they do is they actually devour the prey. Okay, so if you see barn owl eating the rat, then it's even worse than slaughtering a chicken. It means, for me, your view can be different. And their feeding, I have already told you about feeding habits. So habitat, they usually live near to the human habitation, because they prefer tall buildings for nesting purpose. Okay, you can hear the call of a barn owl. Um, so please interrupt me if you cannot hear the call. Okay, so that is the barn owl. If you hear this call whenever It's mostly you will hear it after dark, total dark. That is here at my place. I hear the call by 9 o'clock till 12. Okay, and the adult ones most usually don't call that much. But if there is a chick, then it will call continuously. The call is slightly different from the adult one, but it will continuously call. So that is because they want their parents to bring them the food. Okay. Second one is spotted owlet. This is the most common owl that you can see. I'll just play the call. Again, this spotted owlet is seen very close to human habitation because their ability to see in darkness is less than the other owls. Okay, so you will see them near the light poles where they get some amount of light. They usually won't hunt in the bright light of the pole. They will hunt in the vicinity around where there is some amount of light is present and they can see better. Okay, their feeding habits again include small mammals, very small mammals actually, like the rats, not the rodents, and then insects mostly. So this owl is special because uh, you can see it in the vicinity of your place, house, wherever you live. It's called as jungle owlet, but you will see it almost everywhere, at least in Goa. Okay, habitat, they prefer like small trees where they can hide themselves. And this owl is crepuscular, so they hunt during dawn and dusk, and you might see them hunting during daytime as well. Okay, so there is nothing strange in that. They are very well adapted with the light. And as I said, they feed on the insects and small mammals. So they also feed on small birds. That is, while going at the roosting place, the small birds, they will usually wait for the bird to sit in the roosting place, and then they will catch that bird and feed on them. Okay. Next one is brown hawk owl. So coming to the name, the brown hawk owl, it is called as hawk owl because it prefers tall trees and very high man-made structures to sit on, so that they can have a good vision around. They can, according to the behavior and the place that they try to perch or sit upon, they are very closely related to shikra and the hawks. They sit on the top of any tree and try to look around, see if there is something moving. So that is the specialty of brown hawk owl. This brown hawk owl is seen almost everywhere in Goa, but you should have some large tall trees so that it can have a perching site. I have seen this bird roosting in coconut trees. So if you hear a call during a daytime, which is normal for this bird, he will call during daytime, anytime actually. There is no specific time as such. At night time, he will obviously call. But if you can hear the call, this is the call. This bird is also called as brown bubuk because of the call boo boo. Okay, so that's why this bird is called as brown bubuk. If you go on eBird, then you won't find the name brown hawkal. You will find the name brown bubuk. Okay, so if you hear the call, then follow the as far as your hearing ability is concerned, try to find the bird. It's not means you will not find the exact place as such, because mostly the owls have this very heavy calls, which you will feel that the bird is on the right side of you, but it is either on it's on the right side, little bit on the left side, or little bit more on the right side. It's like variation. If you practice it, then you will come to know that okay, this is the place where you can hear the call from. It comes with a bit of practice and bit of experience, but for starting you might feel that the call is coming from one tree, but the bird might be on some another tree. Okay. So coming to brown wood owl, that is a large owl. As far as this owl is concerned, it is very common. Most of the people think it is not so common, but if you have large trees around your house which can support the owl, as in this owl roost on large trees with you know if you can see the owl, this the back of the owl looks like a tree trunk. Okay, so it will sit close to the trunk. So anything similar to the similar looking tree which looks like the owl, you can you can be pretty sure that the owl will be present there, or might have visited sometime or other. Okay, you should have large trees to support this owl habitat. Okay. Feeding habit, as far as the feeding habitats is concerned, it feeds on large rodents, and almost every small things, that is insects and geckos and other things. So not pretty sure about which this which food or which group it prefers, mammals or other fishy mammals or geckos or insects. But uh, according to a few researches, it prefers mostly mammals, small mammals. That is 60 to 70% of the feeding comprises of small mammals. You can hear the call now. The call is quite low, as in you might not hear it clearly, so try to concentrate and hear. Yeah, so that is the call. Who. Okay. And similar sized owl, little larger than the brown wood owl, is the brown fish owl. This owl prefers shallow water bodies to hunt the prey. So if you go with the name fish owl, so it feeds on fishes. Actually in shallow water, whatever you will find, it will feed on that. It can feed on that. That is amphibians, then small crustaceans, even the snakes for that matter. The habitat is means it is quite commonly found everywhere in Goa. You should have shallow water bodies to support its feeding habits. You can hear the call. Call is again quite. Uh, you might not hear it clearly, so try to concentrate. It's quite similar to the brown wood owl. So the call is actually ooh ooh. Okay, so that is the call. If you can hear it, then good. If you cannot hear, then you can find its call on if you type it on Google, brown fish owl call, then you will find it on Zenocanto. You can hear the call. There are actually two calls of this bird, but what we hear in Goa is the woo woo, and the second screech is mostly heard in other parts of the country, not in Goa. So the next one is Indian scops owl. Uh, this bird is quite common for all the locations, for drier regions basically, not found in forest per se. You can you might see it in forest, but prefers the dry habitats and small trees. Okay, so feeding habits is mostly insects and small mammals again, but mostly the mammals, owls prefer small mammals, but because of the size, it prefers small insects. You can hear the call now. So if you heard the call, then it feels like a puppy who is, making a noise. It's not barking, but dogs, puppies which make sound, that kind of a sound. So you have to listen quite carefully. And this bird usually calls during morning hours and late evening. It's a crepuscular bird again, but actually it's not a crepuscular bird, sorry. So it calls during the dawn and dusk, but at night time it is quite active, but you might not hear the say 8 to 4. So if you want to look out for this bird, then try to search for it in the early morning or late evening. Oriental scops owl, just similar to the Indian scops owl. This The difference between this bird prefers forest, thick vegetation. So it is seen in places like Bondla Wildlife Sanctuary, Bhagwan Mahavir Wildlife Sanctuary, and nearby places wherever the forest in the forested area. So this bird is quite vocal uh, at night time. For the means you can hear it calling from 8 o'clock till morning 5 o'clock continuously. Probably might not be the same individual, but different individuals calling at different times, but they are continuously calling. And now when we visited Bondla Wildlife Sanctuary for the survey, that time we could hear at least 5 or 6 of them calling at a time. So now you can hear the call. I'll play the call. So it is basically metallic sound. Uh, the call is similar to, if you know, white chick barbet. Call is similar, not exact same, but this call is quite metallic. This bird don't call during the daytime usually. So you will hear it in the forested area. If you visit any forested area, it's easy to hear this bird. 30-eared owl, again, this owl is not seen that much in Goa, but you will find it in dry areas, plateau areas. So this bird is usually seen in Verna Plateau, on Verna Plateau, Pilain Plateau, okay, but not so commonly sighted bird. So feeding habitats per se, I know that it feeds on small mammals, but I have never seen it feeding because I have seen that bird only few times. So habitat, as I told you, it prefers plateau and dry areas. It's quite difficult to hear the call in Goa. They don't usually call because of the less sighting. You might not even hear the call. So you have to basically depend upon sighting rather than the call. In other cases, in owls, you are mostly dependent on the call. You might not see the bird if you directly use a torch to find a bird, then find the owl then. But in this case you might have to use the light to see the bird rather than the depending on the call. Then comes the spot-bellied eagle owl. This is the only forest eagle owl found in Goa. It's quite large. Looks it's huge actually. I have personally not seen this bird, but I would love to see. I've heard the calls quite a few times. It prefers forest, thick forest. Then Uh, Feeding habits, again, it can, because of the size, it can hunt down mammals, not the large mammals but the small mammals, to medium sized mammals. It's actually 80 to 90 centimeter in height, so it's quite huge. And if you hear the call, I'll play the call now. If you can hear the call, then it feels like someone is strangling a woman or a child is crying. So typically there are stories, which suggest the this bird as a ghost. Okay. And in some stories uh, from Sri Lanka, this bird was known to be a ghost, means because there were no torches available that time. They used to see this bird with a lantern or something. And when you see such a huge bird, you are actually not expecting a bird of this size to see. So you would see only two eyes, red color eyes. And when this eyes uh, throw up a bright light, if you throw up a bright light on this eyes, then they will shine and it will feels like someone is watching at you. It's of a human. Their eyes are larger than the human size, eyesight. So many times people describe it as a ghost. Sri Lanka bay owl, that is the least known owl from Goa, because it is sighted only two times, from Bhagwan Mahavir Wildlife Sanctuary and one from Madhe Wildlife Sanctuary. Uh, Again, habitat, it prefers forested habitats. Feeding habits, because of the small size, it's as large as the Indian and Oriental scops owl. It feeds on insects mostly. You can hear the call. It is quite distinct call. So if you hear this call, you should not have a confusion between any of the other owl. So coming to nightjars, uh, the first one is Jordan's nightjar, which is the most common. So why they are basically called as nightjars? Okay. Where their feeding habit consists of insects, flying insects. So what they do is they open their mouth, and their mouth looks like a jar. Okay. If you know the jar which we used to which we used to have in hotels, which had a uh, covering on it, the metal covering on it, the steel one. If you open that jar, the shape what which that jar will look like, this nightjar's mouth looks alike. Okay, that's why this bird is called as nightjar. And the scientific name Capri mulgus comes from folk tales which suggested that nightjars feed on goats. Capri means goats, and mulgus means bloodsucker. So they were known as blood sucking out of the goats. So that's why the Capri mulgus comes from. Habitat, it prefers uh, open areas, basically to glide and catch insects. So there is no specific habitat as such. It's seen everywhere in Goa. This is the call of Jordan's nightjar. You might have heard it quite a lot of time, because it's quite common. It continuously calls for a long time, and there are these birds are in a lot of numbers. So hearing a call during winters at least is very easy. Next one is jungle nightjar. So if you go with the name jungle nightjar, it's seen in jungle, but mostly open areas near the jungle, because feeding their feeding place is like open area, and they usually use jungle to roost. That is during daytime they go in the jungle and they will sit on a branch to camouflage themselves. Their feeding habits again are similar to Jordan's nightjar. All the nightjars have same feeding habits. So this is the call of jungle nightjar. Next is Savannah nightjar. This nightjar is seen in open areas, plateau areas. Uh, Jordan's nightjar is seen with both jungle nightjar and Savannah nightjar, but Savannah and jungle nightjar is not commonly seen together. Okay, because their habitats are totally different. The sound is this is the sound which Savannah nightjar makes, and it's easy to mistake it for a insect, but the call is quite loud. If you can hear it from 100 meters of distance, you will hear a voice that you cannot miss out on. The last nightjar that is seen in Goa is Indian nightjar. This nightjar is not seen per se in Goa. There are few records from Goa. These nightjars are basically have weak flight. Weak flight is in obviously they feed on insect while flying, but they cannot travel a long distance. So Indian nightjar is not seen in Goa, and whenever it is seen in Goa, it's actually the sighting is either continuous or else the bird is thought to be dead, because if it comes to Goa it can go back obviously, but it is little difficult for the bird to travel so much. So this is according to my understanding, and it might differ from someone else's observations. For habitat, it prefers open areas, just like Savannah nightjar, and it can be also seen near the jungles in open areas, but it roosts in open areas, so they don't prefer trees to roost on. So this is the call. Easy to recognize the call. Start slowly, then it's a swift call. Next group of birds that we see, the family is frogmouth, Sri Lanka frogmouth. This bird is very close to our hearts, you can say, because I have personally seen this bird so many times, and it was overwhelming experience for the first time when we saw this owl, and again it was overwhelming when we saw it for the first time for in a daylight. Okay, so this bird is mostly seen in forest. That is, you should have canopy cover, and below that canopy cover you should have thick vegetation, understory vegetation, which supports them in roosting. So it's quite camouflage. The bird is quite camouflage. The first one which you can see on the left side, orange one is female and the gray one is male. So this what this frogmouth does is, uh, and during the daytime, in breeding season, during the daytime, female is quite active. It will look out for the predators, or whoever is coming close to the nesting site. Even before nesting, she's quite active during the day, and the male sleeps during the day. As in, you can see the male, the eye is means the female is quite looking sharp, and the male is looking little dull because he is resting, and the female is quite active. And on the right side you can see again it's a female. The difference between these two female is that during daytime, the left hand side female has a means the pupil is dilated, and on the during nighttime the pupil is contracted. This is to increase their hearing, sorry, uh, eyesight, or to see accurately during the night time. So what I observe personally in frog moths is that when you use a light to see the frog moth, okay, if you put a light on the frog moth, it will contract its pupil quickly, and if you remove the light, then it will it as soon as possible, which is not seen in most of the owls. They take some time to dilate the pupils and contract the pupils. That is why uh, I personally prefer not to put direct light on owls, because they are not so used to the bright light. You can hear the call. I'll just play the call. So this call is of a female, the first one. This one is the female, and the second one in the background is male. So they have different calls. Uh, if you think about owls, then they mostly have same calls for male and female. But in frog mouse, the calls are different for male as well as female. And the call during breeding time, they call differently during the breeding time. Very less about this is known. So um, let's see what we can know in future about this frog moths and their breeding. So coming to night herons, you might have expected owls and nightjars to be there, frog moth to be there, but night herons are typically the guys who miss out if you are thinking about night birds. Okay, so this is the Malayan nightjar, which is seen in thick forest. If you want to see this bird, you can try in Kotigaon or Bhagwan Mahavir Wildlife Sanctuary. These birds come down hillside during the summers, okay, and during the monsoon it climbs back on the mountain. As in, I'm talking about the elevation here, not the one single mountain. So their feeding habitats are quite similar to the other herons. Habitat I have already mentioned. Second one is black crowned night heron. Very easy to find this bird if you visit any of the mangroves. Then you will see this bird, uh, preferably in Dado wetland, Karambolim. Uh, then Salimali in Shorang. Feeding habits, and again similar to the other herons, but it feeds during night time, so the time is different, but the feed is same. So last one is Indian thickening. It is also called as thick Eurasian stone curlew, because the call is similar to Eurasian curlew that is found in the wetlands or near the beaches, Agashem mudflat or Morji sandbar. So the call is similar to Eurasian curlew, but it the habitat is a dry area, plateau areas, and these plateau areas will have rocks basically. So that is why this is called as uh, stone curlew. Okay, habitat I already told you. Feeding habits are quite similar to the red wattle lapwing and yellow wattle lapwing. So I have made two slides where I want to talk about birding at night. So if you want to do birding at night, if you want to explore your area, you should know the habitat around. You should understand the habitat around. What do you have? You have plateaus, you have forest, you have uh, some shrubs around. Okay, based on what I have talked from starting, the owls, nightjars, you will come to know which species you can find in your area. Okay, then second is be aware of your neighbors. That's what I was talking about. You should know which birds to expect. If you are living in a forest, you might expect most of the large owls, then even oriental scops owl, then jungle nightjar, frogmouth. If you are living near a plateau or dryland area, then you might see the plateau, the species which prefers plateau habitat. Then knowing calls is always helpful. As I said, you should know the calls to find out, because I'll just share this screen again. Wait for a moment. So thing is that if you are looking to, can you see the screen?
Your screen is not
I
shared.
think no, so I'll just share the screen again. Now you will be able to see the screen. So yeah, and last is finding a birding buddy. Why that birding buddy is important is nighttime it is risky to travel, risky to roam around. If you think that okay, going in the forest during nighttime is risky, but why we cannot go on a plateau or dry areas, that means there is no not much of risk involved in that. But to tell you frankly, there is very less risk involved in visiting a forest during night time than visiting a plateau. Because on plateau, if you know, you will find saw-scaled vipers, russell vipers in numbers. Okay, so you might miss out on them while trying to look out for owls. But in forest you might see other snakes which are quite colorful. They are not venomous. So this plateaus are more dangerous than forests. So if you have that kind of thinking, then so last slide, I wanted to talk about photography during nighttime for night birds. So for my first concern is you should maintain some distance from the owl. Okay, so what distance? So you should keep in mind that if you are observing a owl, you should see its behavior. Okay, that owl's natural behavior should not change. If you are going close to the owl, it will stare at you, it will behave differently, it will panic. So that is when you know you are very close to the owl. Okay, second is do not disturb their natural processes. Obviously their natural processes are feeding, then mating. Okay, and mating rituals. So you should not disturb the owls while if you see a bird being doing this any kind of activity. So uh, third is avoid the use of flash. Obviously, as I said earlier, owls are not used to bright lights. If you put a bright light in direct into the eye of the owl, they might go blind for some time. Okay, blind as in you might have observed this phenomena while riding or driving. When someone flashes a light on your eye, you tend to lose your sight for some time, then it recovers. So for the owl, it is their eyesight is very important. So you should not use flash while capturing a photo or This flash means the flash that you use for photography, as in the separate flash or the camera flash. I'm not talking about the flashlight, as in the torch. You can use torch, use mostly uh, yellow colored torch than the white LED torch. That is more preferable. uh, that will reduce your uh, interaction, as in it will not harm the owl that much. Okay, then share the bird location wisely. I have put this point because most of the people obviously share the location. I have seen this bird here, you can go and visit and see. Obviously that is a good practice. You should practice that. You should always help others to find birds. But putting it on Facebook or putting it on any other social platform can be dangerous to owls, because if those people don't know the ethics of birding, then probably that owl might be in danger, or you might not see the owl again there. Okay, it might leave that place. So uh, again, do not trample sensitive vegetation. That is because if you have seen the frog mouth, it was sitting in a shrub kind of a thing, and they prefer that. But if you, for your birding this thing, for to simplify your problems, if you start cutting down the understory vegetation, then that is their main habitat. Okay, where they roost. So you should not trample the vegetation. That is very important for them. Last one I have put, my personal point of view. So strictly prohibited. Photography is strictly prohibited, because drone photography is difficult at night. Professional can do it, no doubt about that. But if you are not a professional, if you don't have that much experience in drones, you might try to experiment it, but the experiment can go wrong for the owl or the night bird that you are trying to see. Okay, so that is why I have put this point. Keep that in mind, and that's it from my side. uh, Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jalmesh, for that lovely talk. That was really interesting with all the calls that you played. And now we'll see if there are a few questions that come up for you, and you can, kind of answer those questions one by one. So let's wait for a few minutes. We already have one, so let's wait for a few more minutes, and then let's start taking questions.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so the first question is here on the screen. How is the camera's flashlight different from torch lights?
Okay. So if you have used camera flashlights, then you will come to know that uh, it's quite harsh than the torch light. Okay, if you want to experiment, then you can ask someone to put a torch close to your eyes, then on your eyes, then try it with the camera flash. Okay, then you will understand that it's very harsh light. And another problem with flashlight is that it that flash happens in a millisecond. Okay, so the bird is not knowing what will happen next, and then this light strikes on the bird. So it is quite difficult for the bird to handle that. Then the torch light which you are already putting on the side of the bird, allowing it to adjust to the light, and then putting on it and trying to capture a photo. Obviously you should try to avoid putting light on birds. If you really want to do birding at night, do it with calls. that is preferred, and that can give you more birds than the photographs and all. Yeah, what is the food preference of Nightjar? Yeah, as I already said, they actually I will show you the this thing. So this jar kind of thing is like this. Okay, so they open their mouth like this and they fly around and try to capture the insect, small insect, flying insects in the flight. So these insects are basically termites. Then the small insects which you see flying around the light pole, those are the ones.
Right. So looks like there is not any more questions on this. So that kind of brings us to the end of the pre-bird festival webinars that we have been having. It's been a great honor to and a privilege to have so many speakers who are based locally to come and be part of this pre-bird festival webinar series. I, on behalf of the Goa Forest Department, thank both Golda and Jalmesh for the amazing talks that they have given today and spent their valuable time with us. So I thank everyone, and with the hope that other people, have the people who have listened to all the talks, have gleaned at least a little bit of information that would be useful for them, and hoping that they would take up the activity of bird watching for the better tomorrow, as I was telling yesterday. So thanks a lot to all the speakers. Thanks a lot to all the listeners and the audience of the webinar series. It has been four really meaningful and fruitful days for me personally, as I've been moderating and listening to all the talks and listening to all the answers to the questions that were asked by the audience. So, with that, we would want to end the Pre-Bird Festival webinar series today with a thanks to all the participants of the talk and all the speakers as well. Thank you and good evening to all the listeners.